Okay, good morning, everyone. We have quorum, so we're going to get going. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 5 to 7 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the OMB, Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. Comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. Now, I'm pretty sure that Councillor Hubley and Councillor Shirelli are not here, and Councillor Wilkinson's sign is here, so I guess she's intending to come, because there's whatever hell on the eastbound Queensway. Unless you're like me, who came in at 6:30 this morning. What time did you come in, Shad? Yeah, okay. You snooze, you lose when it's coming in from the west end. Okay. Declarations of interest. Yeah, but you're going to get a solution. It's called LRT. Declarations of interest. None. Confirmation of minutes from the agenda 52. 52. Does that mean we've had 52 meetings in this term? Aren't we lucky? 10th of October 2017. Carried? Yep.
Carried.
Communications, variance specifics, and infill construction related complaints. Response to inquiries.
Yeah,
okay, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Leeper. So one, we have a presentation from staff, and we have a speaker, so we are going to hold number one. Number two, we also have a presentation, so we will hold that as well on building better and smarter suburbs and infrastructure standards review. And this is specifically on the arterial road cross sections. Number three, memorandum of understanding with CRT Developments, Inc., respecting the acquisition of Shea Road Woods through parkland dedication and cash. Do you want to hold it, or do you have something to, do we have any speakers? Well, why don't, with we'll let, yeah. So can I introduce it then? Sure. Right. Rather than have any associated staff stay during the presentations, etc. The acquisition of Shea Road Woods has been a priority for Councillor Kadri through his terms as a city councillor representing Stittsville. And, you know, recently they had an on-site announcement with the mayor in attendance. And when the mayor first came into office, Councillor Kadri highlighted the importance of retaining these woods. And the mayor has been supportive all along of, well, since he's come onto council, back onto council, or onto the new council. You know, you were quick to alert him to that. Through the development of the Fernbank Community Design Plan, Councillor Kadri also ensured that the Shea Road Woods were noted in the CDP as an area to be retained, and you've continued to follow through with the planning department to ensure that saving these woods was a priority, and today we have them before us. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your comments. I'm very pleased that the plan to protect the Shea Road Woods is moving forward, and proud of the work that has gone into creating this agreement. We as a community are now one step closer to celebrating the projection of these woods, which otherwise would be developed. I would like to thank Mayor Watson and city staff along with CRT Development for their support in working with me to protect this important green space so that it can continue to be enjoyed by the community and future generations. Specifically, I would like to highlight the following staff: Stephen Willis, John Smith, Nick Stowe, James Bowser, Mark Richardson, Kevin Berry, and Jennifer Shepard for all of their hard work on this file. I would also like to thank Council and Councillors Planning Committee and Chair Harder for providing her support along with this committee. Protecting green spaces like the Shea Road Woods is not only an ecological priority, it is also a commitment to quality of life for our residents who value having spaces where they can enjoy nature within the city. As you know, Stittsville is a growing and is one of the fastest growing areas in Ottawa, and importance of protecting these green spaces is the key. As the population grows and neighborhoods evolve, we will continue our commitment to work to maintain these valuable urban natural areas and preserve green space in the city. As you will have seen through the comments submitted to the committee this week from residents about the acquisition of these Shea Road woods. Just read you a couple of those comments, although they've been submitted to each and every one of you. We have moved here from Kansas, 5 years ago. And once we discovered this beautiful place, we began to meet people. I was struck at the sense of community. There are several people that take the time to put birdhouses up throughout the area. There are others that ensure there is seed in them every winter. The trees and shade provide a calm start to a person's otherwise hectic day and a much needed exercise opportunity for the doggy members of the family. Many lasting friendships have been formed on these woods. So just a couple of comments out of the many that we received about 65 comments this week on this particular file. And from the community's perspective, most of the members or some of the members of the community have been using these woods for about 30, 35 years as an unofficial dog walking area. I'm happy to see this file finally come to fruition for the community, and I want to thank everybody for their support, especially the residents of my community that have not only vocalized their support, but also have made day-to-day references to these woods. So thanks everybody, and thanks Chair Hurd.
Thank you, Councillor Kadri, and I want to echo your remarks. Nick Stowe did a terrific job on this. And just for anyone in the audience that doesn't know CRT, that we kind of take for granted, but it's Claridge, Ridgecraft, Taggart that worked together on that. And I don't recall a woods, including Nepean Woods, which is bigger than I think than Shea Woods. Well, it is by a lot, but 30 acres, where we had that kind of communications from the people in the area. So it just shows how important it is. Thank you very much. The next item up is the application to alter 61 Park Road. Oh, yeah, we have to carry it. Carried? The Shea Road? Okay. The next item up is the heritage application. Application to alter 61 Park Road, a property located in Rockwood Park Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and we have 2 speakers on that, so that one's going to be held as well. Next up is part of 6211 Renault Road zoning bylaw amendment. We have Miguel Tremblay. You want to hold it? So that item's held. Zoning bylaw amendment 1620 and 1636 Maple Grove Road. We have one speaker, Miguel Tremblay from Fotan, that is here. This is a really old application.
Madam Chair, could we hold that item, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Next up is 991 Carling Avenue. This is has support of Councillor Leeper. We do have Lloyd Phillips is here speaking for the owner. Does anyone have any questions on this one? Okay, well, we'll have to hold it then, unless it's simple. Okay, does everyone want to give Councillor Brockington the opportunity to ask a simple question? Thank you. And this is just for the audience. It's zoning bylaw amendment 991 Carling Avenue for a temporary 3-year parking lot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. I am supportive of the recommendation, but I do have a question I think is important to ask, and that is, what role does city staff have to play before we entertain these types of requests in asking the hospital or any other employer to promote alternate modes like public transit? How does that get factored into the conversation before we grant use of a parking lot for 74 vehicles? How does the city incorporate public transit in those types of conversations?
Mr. James?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Basically, when a request comes in for, so in this case, a temporary parking lot here, we look at the land use implications on this site. Does it make good planning? With respect, and I understand the councillor, those are very good points to work on, but they wouldn't be dealt with as part of whether or not you should rezone this to have a parking space. They might be done actually through, say, the redevelopment of the hospital, like in the future, and programs like that, but certainly not as part of this application.
Mr. Willis, did you have anything to add?
I think it's to add to what Mr. James said, we'd be looking for major employers like the hospital to develop their own travel demand management plans, which would encourage their employees to take alternative forms of transportation. And as we look, as Mr. James says, as we look to the new facility, that will likely be one of the requirements that we would expect from them coming forward.
Thank you. So, let's see. No one else has any questions? Mr. Phillips, do you need to speak? Where are you? If we're prepared to carry this? No, Madam Chair. And I will add that Bashir, who is the, well-known, he came to see me as a courtesy as well. I was surprised because this is something that you are in favor of, but it's good. Are you here today? There you are. Hello. Thanks for coming out again. So on this item of zoning bylaw amendment, 991 Carling Avenue, is it carried? Thank you. So then we have the Greenbank Road Water Main Class Environmental Assessment Study. That's in my ward. Does anyone have any questions? On the two of them? You want to? Okay. Okay, we'll have to hold both of them? 8 and 9? They are linked. Sure. Just 8? Just 8, or do you want 9 too? You're going to ask the questions at the same time? Sorry, Mr. Gontier, I would going and find, are you here still? Yeah. Go find a room and, someone will let you know when to come back. Unless you want to stay for the pure enjoyment of it. All right. So if we're not holding North Island Link Environmental Assessment Study, is that one carried? We have no speakers. Carried? And then we have information previously distributed, which was Bill 139, Ontario Municipal Board Reform. Okay? Thank you. All right, so back to the beginning. The first item is the Park Development Manual, 2nd edition. And we have Kevin Wary and Diane Emerson coming forward. And Mary Jarvis. Are you here, Mary? No. Where is she? Oh, hi. All right, I'll call you up after the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee. I'm introducing you to Diane Emerson, who's a senior planner in Recreation, Culture, and Facility Services. She transferred over at the big change last October, but we've been working together on the revisions to the park manual and the stuff that Diane is presenting today for quite some time now, as the changes occurred in 2014. At this moment, I'll just hand it all over to Diane.
Thank you. The first edition of the park manual was approved in 2012. The manual was developed to define, standardize, and improve the development of new parks in the city. The first edition was approved in 2012 and has been available online as a reference tool since then. In 2014, a new funding method for new parks was approved, discontinuing the collection of park development charges for non-district parks outside the Greenbelt in favor of a developer-built process for parks. Under the new process, the developers build the parks on behalf of the city and in lieu of paying park development charges. The park manual required an update due to the new process for developer-built parks, and also recommendations by the Building Better and Smarter Suburbs team to create 2 new park typologies. The second edition of the manual provides a detailed description of developer-built parks process to assist staff, developers, and their consultants as they undertake the park design and construction. The 5-staged process is closely aligned with the subdivision process. The 2 new typologies that have been introduced into the manual are the Urban Parkette Plaza and the Woodland Park. The key features of the Urban Parkette Plazas are that they are parks located in an inner urban core area, or a mixed-use town center, or along a main street. Amenities may include decorative paving, shade structures, water features, seating, game tables, and play components. These parks are multifunctional within a confined area of space. Urban parkettes may be as small as 400 square meters. An existing example of such a park is Piazza Dante on Gladstone Street. Key features of the woodland parks are that woodland parks may only be created where woodland is existing and is of good quality, and where active recreation amenities are existing nearby. Recreational facilities such as trails, seating, or small play areas may be established in a way that will not compromise the integrity of the ecosystem in the woodland. A woodland management plan is provided to ensure best maintenance practices to preserve and enhance the woodland. A recently built example is the Haven Crest Woodland Park in Barrhaven. The manual provides details for some new subdivision submission requirements that are required for developer-built parks. These include facility fit plan, community overview plan, and area parks plan. The facility fit plan helps to determine if park amenities will fit in the park properties and provides options for different layouts for these amenities. This plan is submitted early in the subdivision process to ensure the park property is optimal for the uses intended. The community overview plan and the area parks plan are required when several parks are being provided in a subdivision. The area parks plan determines how park amenities will be distributed among several new parks and also determines the overall budgets for all of these parks. This slide just shows an example of the distribution of amenities and costing over a number of different parks in a subdivision. Revisions were required in the second edition. A project charter is now required for each new park and is itemized and explained in the manual. Accessibility section has been updated to reflect the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and also the City Accessibility Manual. The Older Adults section has been revised to reflect the Older Adult Action Plan. The Parks and Public Health section has been revised to reflect current health priorities. The park details have been removed from the manual and now reside in the city for unit price contracts, which are updated yearly. And the name of the manual has been changed from the Park and Pathway Development Manual, as city pathways are now covered in the Transportation Master Plan. Extensive consultation was undertaken with city staff and different departments and the Building and Better and Smarter Suburbs team, and and the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. And in an online survey, all respondents indicated that the Park Manual Second Edition was a good reference document and easy to use and find information. In conclusion, the second edition of the Park Development Manual will ensure the new park process for developer-built parks is clearly understood by all stakeholders. The document will introduce and provide criteria for 2 new park typologies. This document will continue to help to ensure quality parks are built for all residents of Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Emerson. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Kadri? Councillor Lee? Councillor Blake?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just 2 questions, Madam Chair. In terms of the, thank you for your presentation, by the way. In terms of the park plans going forward in terms of development, I'm hearing different stories. One is that, the developers building those parks, understood, but there's something about building permits have to be satisfied, number off before the park can move forward. And secondly, now the question is, the developer is saying that they're going to build a park, which is what we're aiming towards from the city. Are there timelines that identified to those development in the parks? Is the developer given some timelines that within 2 years or 4 years or 5 years of starting a development that they'd have to start building the park?
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Chair, the timeline of park development in new subdivisions is linked directly to the builder's projections for how they will eventually fill out these subdivisions. We are not able to give precise predictions because we are linked to the subdivision approval process. Upon registration, developers are at that point engaged and required to provide us design plans, and at that point we also take securities to ensure that these parks are delivered as planned. We don't speak necessarily to time because that will involve, it does involve the developers actually having sufficient build out in order to proceed.
Thank you for that response, Barry, but I'm hearing in one of the developments in Fernbank, the fact that now there's some permits required for building permits to be satisfied before the developer even starts on the park. And if that's a change in policy, when did that change happen in the policy?
I believe you're talking, sorry, Madam Chair, I believe the councillor's talking about a community park in the Fernbank development. Given the size and scale of that park and the cost of actually implementing that park, we triggered park development commencing at 50% of building permits being issued. This ensured that, first of all, there was people there to start using the park once we could start building, but also it gave our development industry opportunity to ensure that they had sufficient capacity within their own organization to start this project.
So then there's 2 criterias going forward. One is the building permit for community parks versus the neighborhood parks. It's within a certain timeline.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. The smaller, such as neighborhood parks, are triggered quite quickly in the process versus community parks, which are more complex and more expensive. They have to reach a certain capacity in order to proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and just to follow up, you know that the parks are getting built a lot faster than they used to be with this model, which is really important. Next up, I have Leaper, Councillor Leaper, Councillor Blake, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Hubley.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. First, Mr. I just am interested in the size of the urban parks. There are some guidelines in here now for the new urban parkette and plaza. We've been talking a bit about 1976, Scott, where if that proposal goes through, and I hope it doesn't, we will get a new city park in there. How big is that? No, it's the one across. Yeah. How large is that? Just so I can compare to the guidelines that you've put in here.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the park he's referencing is one of our very first urban parkettes that we've actually acquired using the Planning Act. It is approximately 500 square meters in size.
Okay.
By comparison, I would rate this room at approximately 400 square meters.
Fantastic. So that's good to know. Thank you very much for that. One of the design criteria that's in each of these categories is the service area radius. What does that mean? Like, what is that lens as we apply it to the various different types of parks? How do we use that lens?
Madam Chair, the service area radius helps us in greenfield communities as new parks are being developed to place parks within neighborhoods within certain walking distance from each other, and to allow residents to enjoy parks more readily or more handily. The smaller park, the smaller the radius, because there's fewer amenities in there, and they are places for relaxation or enjoyment or smaller scale participation. Community parks, on the other hand, are set much further apart because they're serving a larger area, and that is the radius that we're talking about.
So I'm just wondering if choices get made through that. So for example, for these urban parkettes and plazas, it notes that it does vary with context, but for residential areas, it's 2 to 5 minute walking distance. What kind of choices would be made differently if we were to say that the service area radius was 10 minutes or 20 minutes walking distance?
Madam Chair, the walking distances he's referencing would be for larger scale facilities such as sports fields, large tennis court complexes, things that are serving greater community. In the urban parkette and plaza, frankly, these are opportunities that we are looking to take whenever they arrive. We can't necessarily predict how often we will have those, because it really involves an intensification or redevelopment of an urban site that is itself 4,000 in size or greater. We seek to take these opportunities as much as we can. Using using McCrae Avenue as an example, had we requested on the trailhead site a small parkette when we already have one across the street, it negates potentially the need for that urban parkette across the street because we've already established it.
So at 1976 Scott, we're assuming the people who are going to be using it are within, say, a 2 to 5 minute walking distance.
That is correct.
So I'm interested in how that relates to something like Winston Square, for instance, which is an urban parkette, even though it's not necessarily a designated park, where it's intended to serve actually a whole community despite its small size, because we program it with programming that's intended to bring people.
Madam Chair, we have very few of the squares, they're called, they're not actually parks, and those would be working in consultation with, for instance, local business improvement associations. When I think of Winston Square on a traditional main street, it serves a different purpose, and again, it's us taking advantage of a situation to promote community use within our urban fabric.
So I think the key point there is that it's varies with context. There'll be a lot of consultation, and these one-offs are going to be looked at differently one from the other. The urban parkettes shall have, according to the guidelines, active recreation amenities that are suitable to the demographic. Was any thought given to not having any active amenities at all, to leaving some of these urban parkettes as we move forward without programming, as just a pause in the street, maybe a bench, for example?
Madam Chair, yes, that is entirely possible within an urban parkette. When I think of active amenities, it could be something so simple as a water fountain to provide white noise and a patio space to sit and enjoy the environment they're in.
So in the guidelines where it says that urban parkettes shall have active recreation amenities, that's not necessarily written in stone. We have the opportunity to do something that is less programmed in consultation with the community.
That's absolutely correct, and I would like to point out that we actually employ something called the bench fit program. A park bench can be an active recreation facility depending on the context you put it in.
Yeah, we've got the ones at McCormick Park that just went in as the older adult retrofit, and the community is quite excited about those. Okay, to get some clarification, I appreciate it. Congratulations on getting this together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Blais?
Thanks very much. I agree the new parks policy is generally working well. Parks are being built faster, but there are still some gaps. There were parks that were not built. We had not collected enough DCs to build them, and their developers long since gone, and so they're kind of in limbo, or they had never been included in the DC charge to begin with. So now they're in limbo. And so what changes or what is being worked on to address these gaps that exist for these parks that don't have a builder who can now build it, but also we don't have a development charge anymore, and so how do we go about paying for their completion?
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Chair, there are a number of parks that are caught in a transition period where they were perhaps within a plan of subdivision that was approved prior to the change in 2014. We track each one of these as they come forward, and we have been maintaining what's best described as the Legacy Park Development Charge Fund. Within that, we have either a city build of a park because there is no developer handy, or we return development charges that we took from a developer to said developer for them to build the balance of the park based on what point in time they were at. This transition period I don't expect to last much longer. We are currently working with Claridge, actually, with an East End park right now, but we have funded through the legacy development charges various park constructions by the development industry, and at budget this year you will see us actually looking to city build certain legacy parks that were also caught in transition. That is part of the 2018 budget submission by RCFS.
So is it possible to include a list of all the parks that staff feel are caught in this transition to ensure that staff's view of the outstanding parks is the same as councillor's view on the outstanding parks?
I almost said Madam Chair, sorry, sir.
He's used to it,
Chair. We can forward to the council or to the committee our 10-year capital forecast, which includes some of these parks.
Capital forecasts are very nice. That's what you plan to spend money doing. My question is, can you provide a list of the parks you feel are caught outside of the process so that council agrees that you have captured all the parks that are caught outside the process? Because I'm not sure that we would agree, I guess is what I'm getting at, Kevin, and so I want to make sure that you know what I'm thinking of, and if I'm in that boat, I would bet that there are other councillors who might be in the same boat.
Mr. Chair, we will share our list with Councillor Blais, and if there is something missing, we will obviously have to discuss and make amendments.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I've just spoken to Leanne. We'll make sure that's circulated. Next on board, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this report. It is easier to follow than the other one. I know that you said there's consultation in doing it, but it wasn't with the general public. So I think now we only do that with the individual park plans later on. But it's just something to take account of, I think, in going forward. It may lead to some questions later on that come up. One of the things that I saw in there, first of all, on curb cuts. I have a park that's an example of where there should have been a curb cut and there isn't. There is a square park where there's the road that comes up halfway through the park, and that's where the walkway is to go across to get to things in the park. There's no curb cut. Staff tell me they have to come up the other street, go all the way around to the next block away, cross the road at the corner there, come all the way back to use it, which of course people don't do. But for wheelchair, it's almost impossible. And when I went to talk to staff about it, I said, well, according to the manuals, when it's there's three streets, not a full intersection because the fourth street's the park, we don't do them. I haven't given up on that yet, but I'm hoping in the curb cutting one that, in fact, when you have the entrance to the park and it's a major walkway through it, there will be curb cuts at that point, even if it's not in a street. It's really a mid-block crossing, but it's needed. And it wasn't clear what it said in there. You're going to follow the curb cuts according to the manual, and that's what they did in this case. So I just that with you to make sure that there's some clarification that we do have to have them where the main entrance to the parks are. Mm-hmm. And it's not always done. And it's something you don't always notice till too late. And when I did notice it, the community noticed it, then I got in every kind of stalwart thing that you can't do it kind of answer. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get it done eventually, but it's taking a lot of time, and now the developer refuses to do it. And, you know, it just goes one after the other. The other one, another question is on the FIT plans. There was a FIT plan done on the expansion lands off March Road. So that's the first time I've seen them using a FIT plan. It was done by the consultants, just using stuff from the park master plan. I imagine they may talk to staff. We saw it at the Crown Group. The difficulty with that is it had some things that I felt were missing when it came to council, and that's where I raised the point. You're having 2 playing fields and an ice rink and everything else, and there's no washrooms, which is a big omission in this whole document. It never mentions washrooms. It mentions community buildings, but you can have washrooms without community buildings as well. And now they're putting in all these Johnny-on-the-spots in many parks because there aren't any there. It'd be so much better because we now have water and sewer at every park. In those parks which have a lot of playing fields particularly, to have a washroom, but it's not
Councillor,
mentioned
do you have
in
a
the
question for
document.
staff?
So I'm just wondering why it's not there.
Madam Chair, to respond to the first question regarding parks where mid-block crossings are required, courtesy recent changes, we are actually employing in certain locations mid-block crossings using pedestrian crossovers. We did not have that in the past, and mid-block connections were not something that we could control, in the sense that permission for crossing the street is actually outside the park boundary. However, in our park master plans that are going forward, we actually encourage 2 street frontages to parks and an intersection so that people can access the park at an appropriate location. Regarding building facilities of any kind into a city park, the park plans will address or reserve space within a park conceptually for a new building to be provided, whether it's a very small one for a bathroom or a large one for a community center. However, the park budgets are there for the landscape construction of the park, and they're not sufficient to build bricks and mortar facilities.
I recognize the budgets don't include them, but I think there's a mistake in how we handle our budgets.
Maybe,
so that's something that maybe a policy
maybe you bring
issue
up a budget or something like that.
On the curb cuts, this one I'm talking about is a new park. It was only built about 1.5 years ago, maybe just before we changed the policies. But the issue is not that; it's they're saying now they won't do it. So I'll keep on that one. So the FIT plan, what the problem I have with it is they're done sometimes years ahead of when that park will be developed, particularly in expansion land. So it was done 2 years ago. It won't be built there for another 2 or 3, maybe 4 years. Things change. So how locked in stone are those plans? When you actually go closer to the time of construction and doing the detailed plans, will you then review it and make changes if there are changes that need to get made?
Can I just ask you to speak when you respond with regard to the manual, so we get back on the manual, and how you've dealt with perhaps these issues in the manual? And
yes.
if you didn't, like, that's a conversation that could be had after with any of the councillors that have other specifics. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think the example that you're talking about is with the North Canada Area Parks Plan.
That's one, but there's going to be many in other parts of the
Right, and there are facility fit plans within the Area Parks Plan, which is in a part of the manual. But we would revisit all the, when we have a facility fit plan for a park, we revisit that at the concept planning stage, and that's when we get into the consultation with yourselves, with the councillors, and with the public, and we certainly can make amendments to those plans at that time before moving forward.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're still going to go through that process.
Yes,
and it wasn't,
for sure,
yeah.
yes.
The last things I just wanted to mention is I look at all of these things and they all look and set things up as if the land is perfectly flat and easy to work on. I don't have much of that in my area. I have a lot of rock and things like that, which makes it trickier. Are these plans, when we're doing them, we've had to be very flexible in some, or it costs a huge amount of money because they have to blast the rock away. Is it that the ability in this plan to actually have parks that are a little different when you have different terrain? And that can happen anywhere in the city.
Yes, for sure. Basically, we look at the facility fit plan, and when we do, we look at existing topography, how the subdivision will change the topography, and also the existing vegetation within that park. And that moves forward into the concept planning and into the detailed design phase of the park
So
planning.
these are just examples, but they're not like locked in stone. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Hubley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first off, I want to apologize First time in 8 years I've ever been late for planning committee.
Well, it gave me
but
an
it took
opportunity.
2 hours to get
Yeah.
in from Canada today, so I'm going to be talking to the people in transportation.
Well, and actually, so 3 of you were missing, and so it
Yeah.
also gave me an opportunity to
We didn't
mention,
drive in together.
I mentioned who's getting LRT and who's not, too, for the future, so.
I'm not going that far, but anyway, there's definitely issues with the roads today, for sure. A couple of questions on this manual. Just first off, before I ask my question, I want to follow up on Councillor Leeper's point about the passive parks where the wording says shall have some activity in it. My fear with that is, as you said to Councillor Leeper, they don't necessarily have to, but my fear is several years down the road, someone's going to read this manual and say, okay, it has to have activity in it. And as you well know, I have 2 parks that we purposely did not put activities in it to keep them in their natural state, one with a pond and a lot of trees, and the other full woodlot. And we had quite a bit of discussion at the start with staff that wanted to put a play structure in the middle of a woodlot. I want to be able to avoid that. I think I'm worried about the word shall.
Madam Chair, along with our report here, where we've asked for delegated authority for the general manager to make tweaks as necessary, I'd be happy to look at the word shall and say should consider something more appropriate. Speaking to the woodlot thing, Councillor Harder's aware of a play structure we just placed in Haven Crest Park with great success. Each property needs to be looked at, of course.
I wonder if just if we're going to delegate to it, it should also include the ward councillor, because I think we represent the residents of the area. We know or should know what the people in the community want, and I've had these fights already. I don't want to have them again. We made a lot of changes to this, Madam Chair, when we did Building Better Suburbs. The intent was to take away the red tape from trying to get a park done. We knew of examples where it took, I believe it was 10 years, one in Orleans, to get the park built. And we purposely did this as a pilot under the Building Better Suburbs to get rid of the tape. The idea was to keep it very simple and move it forward. Was staff would set the criteria for what needed to be in the park, the minimum requirement. Developer goes away, builds it, we come back in and inspect it later. If it doesn't meet those minimums, then there's a problem. But in most cases, at least in the ones I've been involved with since we started Building Better Suburbs, the developers actually upgrade the parks from the minimums. So I'm curious as to what the impact of this is going to be. Have we consulted with the industry, and do they see problems with this? Is this going to slow us back down?
Yes, we have, and in fact, Mary's here to speak to her involvement in it as an industry rep. And as far as the delegated authority, that's probably something you want to take note of for when we do the next governance review, if you want to include that. If you want to make a change for it. More appropriate, I think. I don't know, Ms. Enta, you probably don't have history on that, but I'll follow up if you want before council.
Yeah, I'm very worried with this, Madam Chair. So you're saying Mary Jarvis is going to come up and speak to it, that
absolutely.
the industry supports it? Okay, I'll wait then and maybe ask her a question.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brockington, and I think that's okay.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To staff, who was the online survey geared towards?
Madam Chair, the online survey was with the development industry and city planning staff.
Was there any outreach? I know these are amendments to the manual, but was your consultation with various staff and the Home Builders Association spanned almost 3 years? At any point, did you do outreach with the public and interested public stakeholder groups who may want to have seen these proposals and provide comment?
Madam Chair, the revisions today are the developer build process and the 2 new park typologies recommended to us by Building Better Smarter Suburbs. We consulted with the building and development industry and with people responsible for the Building Better Smarter Suburbs.
And the changes proposed that deal with accessibility issues are changes that are based on provincial legislation?
That is correct, Madam Chair. We updated our references to various policies and requirements by the province. For instance, accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, as well as the city's own, for instance, the Older Adult Action Plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum, and then Councillor Kadri again. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had a similar concern as Councillor Hubley and Leeper about the shell, and my concern was specifically on the parkettes, where a minimum size is dictated and a specification, for example, that a parquet need be rectangular. Those are the types of things where you can imagine a situation where perhaps you have slightly less than 0.4 hectare, or you have a shape because of the way the land ownership is situated that isn't rectangular. So in those cases, I mean, guidelines are generally seen as not compulsory. Guidelines are interpretive, but then when you see the word shall, that suggests that it's mandatory. So I do think there is an issue there that we need to sort out as to whether or not one could reasonably expect to vary from what is specified here for the design. So that's the first question, I guess, is do staff see the ability to move forward on a particular type of park in a way that is not consistent with the size requirements? Maybe I'll stop there and get an answer.
Madam Chair, the minimum size of 400 square meters came up as a joint venture between urban design, planning department, recreation staff, touring every small park in the city of Ottawa. We actually investigated what is too small, what is our minimum standard, and then shape came into perspective. The reason for why we mentioned rectangular, because we did perceive a risk of a 2 meter wide by however many meters long park being proposed through a process which would actually not serve any great function or not give us sufficient rationale to proceed with a park acquisition of that kind. We recommend a regular shape to the park so that we can put basic amenities in it, whether it be a gazebo, a fountain, a patio space. We need to ensure that the property that is being acquired is something that is going to serve us over the longer term.
Yeah, maybe the difference in interpretation is you're talking about property to be acquired, but I can think of a number of cases, including a small parkette that we just worked on over the last couple of months that was existing city property. So this was a matter of turning what was essentially a grassed area into something that was akin to a parkette. And I just want to make sure that in future, when we work on projects like that, we have the opportunity to take advantage of the fact that the park classification could apply in this case, because I assume that there's also a relationship between one explains a particular park typology and whether we as councillors can use cash in lieu of parkland for the development of whatever that entity is.
Madam Chair, speaking to the cash in lieu of parkland piece, cash in lieu of parkland is fully eligible to acquire property and to build facility or recreational components within a park land or any city-owned land. The only time you can't use your cash in lieu of parkland is whether the improvement is not permanent, or whether the improvement is not recreational in nature, or if it's to occur on privately owned land.
Okay, so there would be nothing to stop us from using cash in lieu of parkland money on a proposed parkette that is 350 square meters as opposed to 400 square meters.
Madam Chair, a specific example that I'm not aware of, but I'd be happy to work with you because I work on cash in lieu of parkland projects throughout the city as well.
The point being that one doesn't have to satisfy the definition of the typology here in order to use cash in lieu of parkland. Right. Thank you.
No, the answer is no. For example, cash in lieu of parkland, I mean, Kevin can confirm this, but I don't know who else is doing this, but you know, I have great good fortune having the almost 40-year-old Walter Baker Sports Center. It's 200,000 square foot building, and I invest my parkland in there a lot. New scoreboards, time clocks for all the ice users, new carpets for the that are far outdated in the change rooms and all that stuff too. So the cash in lieu of park plans has to be, money has to be permanent, but it can be for what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm just worried that if I want to put it into a parquet, but the parquet doesn't satisfy the definition, does that exclude it? And the answer that Kevin said is no, it does not, so I'm satisfied. Thanks.
But I'll give you another example too, that there is an application that I'm working on now in Stonebridge area, and the developer wanted to call something a parquet, and the city staff said, no, that doesn't fit under our terms, so they're going to have to give cash in lieu of parkland. They're still going to do what they wanted to do, but you see, when they deem it to be parkland, then they have to take over and maintain it, right? So that's part, so sometimes it doesn't fit for the qualification either. Councillor Kadri, and then Mary, you're up.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And just one question about the accessibility that has been raised on this table this morning. In terms of the road cuts that Councillor Wilkinson was speaking about, if you're building a new park and it leads to an existing pathway already built previously, are we responsible to make sure that that pathway is accessible into the park or not?
Madam Chair, if we're connecting to something that exists and is historical, as in it was constructed way in advance of this park, that would be out of scope for the new park development. The new park development applies to that property. In the future, when pathway reconstruction will be required, it must meet the newest standards.
And I appreciate that answer, Mr. Weary, but the concern we have as a city that we've got this accessibility plan that's coming in place by the province by 2021 to say that all, the facility should be accessible, the park should be accessible. If we are dealing with this kind of a scenario, are we working towards making that accessible? And I heard your earlier comment that there's not enough money in the budget for parks. Is there a need for additional money through another budget process for accessibility to, upgrade these kind of scenarios?
Madam Chair, the park process in the manual we have to ensure that everything we build is accessible. However, a go-forward plan for outside of this manual is really it's the responsibility of infrastructure services, and we do work with them for updating city facilities and parks. However, that is a different purpose for what we're here today, and I did not bring the right staff to discuss that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So thanks, Mary, for coming out to speak to this today.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Mary Jarvis is before us for anyone who doesn't know, and Mary's with Canada Lands.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and the members of committee. My name is Mary Jarvis, and I'm here this morning as the Chair of Builder Developer Council of the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. As you can hear, I am a little we would like to express our appreciation of staff's efforts to consider our concerns and to voice their support for the second edition of the Manual of Park Development. In 2014, as you heard earlier, a new park funding strategy was implemented. The Park DC was discontinued in favor of the home builders, assuming responsibility to build these facilities in new communities. In early 2015, a working group, which included city staff and GOBA, Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association representatives, moved towards clarification of the new process and worked to complete a new set of subdivision conditions for parks and defining the process for design approval of developer-built parks. Not all was rosy, but we worked through it. So the various issues that arose through the process since 2012 was the determination of city standards for various park amenities, the need to standardize and better document standards, the need to document and itemize how park design drawings are reviewed and approved by city staff, and we found that timing was critical. Confusion over who does what and when it comes to park design, public consultation, and park construction. At what point do we host our public meetings, and how many meetings are required through the park design process? Concerns relating how park properly gets turned over and assumed by the city once constructed. So happy to say that Kevin and Diane ensure that we provide every dot and T and every element in the park before it gets turned over. Despite the speed bumps inherent in any approach, the process has borne fruit. In mid-2016 and into 2017, we're happy to say that at least 10 new parks were built under the developer-built process. These parks include in the Water Ridge community, the Canada Land subdivision, Alliance Park, and a soon-to-be-named Park Number 9, Guinness Park, River Mist Park, Maplewood Park, Henry Roque Park, Sweet Valley Trails Park, Patrick Gay Park, and Albert Argue Black Park. And today we're here with the completed second edition of the manual for the park development, and it includes a section detailing the developer-built park process. GOBA has actively participated in clarifying the process and addressing the unresolved issues to improve this process. And given that the park development now resides with the Recreation, Culture, Facility Services, did I get it right? Okay, and we now have 10 park planners assigned to working with us in the development of parks, and this is an increase from originally, we started out, I guess, in 2012 with 4 park planners. It has improved our efficiency and also improved our ability to get information from staff and ensure that the parks plans are moving along smoothly. So these are our comments. Thank you very much to committee, to Kevin and his team, and we look forward to the third edition and making further improvements. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And who was it that wanted to ask a question of, oh, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Jarvis, for your presentation and your work on this. So, given your comments, then I would say that you don't see this as something that's going to slow us back down on getting parks done?
Not at all. It's a wonderful tool to help guide our consultants, our landscape architects, and work more efficiently with staff and with the community. It provides a framework to get these.
And thank you for mentioning the work that Mr. Weary's been doing with adding planners and so on. That's helping, because I know you're a good guy, Kevin. I like you. You fix a lot of problems. So, okay, thank you, Ms. Jarvis.
Thank you.
I'm going to support this then, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Marion. Yeah, I was just leaned over to Ms. Nedden to say, I'm surprised that this is to you, Dan. I'm surprised that this is under Kevin's purview, simply because he has so much on his plate across the city. So thank you, Ms. Emerson, for all the work that you have done on this. And clearly, I think we got good questions. And parks are definitely one of the most important products or services that we provide opportunities for people just to have some space in this city. Thank you. So what am I asking everybody to do? Approve, yes. So is this carried? Thanks very much. Okay, the next we have a presentation Landry's going to do, and it is on building better, smarter suburbs and infrastructure standards review, Ontario road cross sections. Now before you, you also have Mr. Miglis, and you also have Mr. Giles, and so through the evolution of building better, smarter suburbs, I can tell you that I think, Alain, you were first of the three of you on the block. And then when we started to get more focus and we came up with the streets portion, which Councillor Hubley was the lead on as a council sponsor, and then Phil, you took over in this section for sure, and it's excellent work you've done. So we look forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Harder. And so as Chair Harder mentioned, through Building Better Suburbs, we created an Artero Road Cross Sections Working Group to review existing Artero cross sections to look at best practices and try to improve the designs. So this working group is comprised of representatives from multiple departments, the development industry, consultants, and as Chair Harder mentioned, Councillor Hubley and Chair Harder were sponsors from the councillor's perspective. So the objective of the review is to implement options to modify urban arterial roads in an economical, practical, and functional manner. And it also took into consideration the city moving towards the complete streets type of design. So this is the current cross-section that we have that was approved in 2000 and is what we use through the Regional Road Corridor Design Guidelines. As you can see, there's a 5-meter wide median, then 2 lanes of traffic, a bike lane, then we've got a shoulder, sidewalks, and then an outer boulevard, a boulevard and an outer boulevard. So the width there is around 37.5 meters as the right-of-way required to build that. So the next few slides just have a few pictures of some of those cross sections that have been built. This is on Stranraer Drive, looking towards the east. On Hazeldean Road, looking again towards the east, and Road looking towards the south. Again, you can see the similar types of designs. You've got the wide median, the bike lanes, the sidewalks set back with boulevards and some trees, and you can also see the utilities with the hydro poles and streetlights. So when we looked at those cross sections, the new ones are intended to be a supplemental to the regional road guidelines that have been approved. So it's not to replace them, but it's to be in addition to. There might be rationale and reasons why you might want to maintain this, but our recommendation through the working group is to go with what I'm going to be moving forward with through this presentation. 2 specific areas that stood out from our perspective. One was the wide medians that we see in front of us, as well as the bike lane and the cycling facilities. So after we reviewed the various cycling facilities, we've been moving towards building cycle tracks. The committee recommended, in lieu of building bike lanes next to the live traffic, that cycle tracks should be built along the corridor. So this would improve comfort and safety, because we hear from cycling advocates and stakeholders that from their perspective, putting bike lanes on roads that are 60 or 70 or 80 kilometers a road is not very comfortable for them. We also took a look at the medians, and from our perspective, when we reviewed this, if a road's going to be 70 kilometers an hour or less and more in a built-in area, medians aren't required. We would only see medians required if the road's designed and operating at 80 kilometers an hour. And in that case, we wouldn't recommend putting the wide 5-meter wide median, but again, just a 1.5 meter. And then at intersections, the road would flare out to provide for some left turn lanes. So from one of the other benefits of this review is that we did identify some cost savings in terms of cost to build these roads. The estimated saving when we look at the 2013 projects that have been benchmarked for the TMP and affordable plan was about $12 million. We don't need as much of right-of-way with the removal of the median. We found that we would gain between a yield of 17 to 20 homes within a 1 kilometer stretch. So that's an improvement from a development perspective. In terms of the cross sections, I'll go through some drawings here that identify what we're proposing. So this first one is our recommended one in most cases. The travel lane of 2 lanes in each direction. You then have a boulevard that allows you to put your utilities. We then put the cycle track, and we separate the sidewalk with another boulevard. And the reason for that is to try to mitigate the influence between both modes of transportation. So this is about 32 meters in width, which is 5 meters less than the one that had been in the guidelines. There might be occasions where we have to have the sidewalk next to the cycle track, and at that point, then you can see the design's a little different in this case, where we don't have that middle median separating the two modes of transportation. There's also this is a 27.5 right-of-way where there's constrained environment, and again there, it's reducing the width of the boulevards to try to make this fit within this type of right-of-way. There'll be areas such as in the greenbelts or forested areas where there's not much land development next to the road, and our recommendation is to put a multi-use pathway. We see that similar on Woodruff today between going through the greenbelt. where you would put the multi one side of the road in a shared facility. And then the bus rapid transit lanes, there's two options there. One is to put a median separating the two lanes of traffic. Again, if you look on the boulevard, we've separated the cyclists on the sidewalk. There will be some adjustments if you've got land restrictions. And similarly, the next one shows the transit facilities being separated by medians. Again, this right-of-way is about 44 meters, I believe. Again, depending on what the corridors are built for. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions councillors may have. Thank you.
Well done with the timing. Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much. Phil, I'm guessing you can guess what I'm going to ask. Conflict, I have no problem with MUPs and cycling tracks. I think they can generally be very well placed and used, and so far some of the ones that we've done in Orleans and Cumberland have been very well received. The challenge is, of course, on arterial roads and the conflict with turning vehicles. And we had an example of a cycling track installed, and this forced, on a 4-lane divided arterial, this forced a fully protected left-hand turn intersection, which doesn't sound like a problem except for there's no conflicting traffic. And so vehicles were waiting 4 minutes to turn left with nothing coming. And that's just bonkers. And so how do we avoid that kind of conflict? Because it was leading to people turning left on a red light, which is, far more dangerous than whatever potential conflict there is that frankly was never happening. So I know what our solution was to that particular problem, but how do we not get ourselves into that problem as we build these new subdivisions in Orleans and Barrhaven and Canada, et cetera?
The challenge is that under the Highway Traffic Act, a bicycle is considered a vehicle. So when, the example you provided was we had the directional multi-use cycle track on one side of the road. And so you'll have the cyclist coming up in the same direction as a vehicle, and the expectation from a motorist is that they may not see that vehicle, that cyclist coming. I think in this case where we've got the two-way bike facilities, it's not an issue. If the bike lane on 10th line, as you mentioned, had been on the right side of the road, we wouldn't have to separate the phasing. When we come up with MUPs, which would be the situation here, there's two options. One is to create that cycling facility at the intersections and separate the movements, or the other option is to have cyclists dismount and walk across the streets. I think that would be something that would have to be discussed with the community at the time that the road's getting built, so that we could make the proper decision based on what the community wants.
So I appreciate that, and I think talking to the community at the time of design is important. The challenge is the group that does design and construction is not the group that handles painting on the road and the installation and timing of traffic lights post-construction. And that's how we got ourselves into the problem that I was talking about. So how do we can talk about it during consultation, but how do we make sure that that discussion and those decisions then get transferred to your shop so that there isn't a reinterpretation post-fact?
Yeah, Madam Chair. So, the design also you talked about was done 4 or 5 years ago, sure. And then there was a lag. I know since that point we've gotten a lot closer in terms of working with our colleagues in other departments.
I'm not trying to focus on the problem, we solved that problem, I get it.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid that in the future?
Well, yeah, exactly what I'm trying to say is that we are now engaged, so we're on the technical advisory committees. We also ensure that up front everyone knows this is how we're going to operate the traffic signals. So we had an example in Councillor Hubley's ward on Terry Fox where we talked about the different options and we came to consensus in that case to have the cyclist dismount because we had it bidirectional. So that would be the approach that we would take. So we're very working closely with our transportation planning groups as well as our planning and construction services. So this doesn't occur in the future.
Now, the options that you showed us, are those going into a menu that the developers and or the planning staff can choose from, or is it going to be one standard, this is what's being built, take it or leave it?
No, it's a menu. So there's options. So what we've provided here is 6 examples. It'll be based on what the design of, or the area of the road is. So, for example, our recommendation is to separate the cyclists with a green boulevard with the sidewalks. I think that was the first one. And again, that's to minimize conflicts with pedestrians. But if you have a limited area, if you're coming up to a bridge, so you may all have this type of design, and you're coming up to a bridge and have those type of things, then you would build the next one. So
sure. So I appreciate and understand why this seems logical, but would the one that does not have the green in between, so still an asphalt path for the cycling and a concrete walkway for pedestrians, would that, yes, this one here, is that not easier to maintain? It's one winter pass, one vehicle, it's, you know, you can clear them both to the same standard. Presumably if we're clearing the cycle lane, it's a big enough road that we want to clear the sidewalk too for pedestrians. And it seems like this is one pass instead of 2 or 3.
From what I understand, because the width is, when you add the two, is about 3.5 meters. If it was a sidewalk plow that was along there, they'd have to do 2 passes anyway, because the sidewalk plow can only. The other thing is, because of accessibility, if we do design the sidewalks and the cycle track next to each other, we have to put a marker or something to distinguish between. No, it's got to be tactile, which is a lot more expensive than just separating. So there was a cost factor as well.
But is building a median not more expensive than putting some kind of tactile thing on the surface, like built into the asphalt?
Well, it's a grass median, so the actual cost is less.
You got a curb, building a concrete
well, you wouldn't
curb.
need a curb here. Here you would just, it would be, you'd have a grass median, with just some trees or things like that in the middle, but.
So in the dividing, go back to the one where it's divided, there's no curb on that divided median. It's asphalt meeting grass direct, tree meeting concrete direct.
Yeah, you don't need any tactile device to separate the cyclists. So I know on Main Street we had to put a tactile and it became quite expensive because of the cost for that material that's required as per the AODA requirements to separate. It's for the visually impaired so that they know that they're walking on the sidewalk versus merge or getting into the cycle facility.
And are we confident, you know, guys that build stuff like to pump it up because it's more exciting to build stuff that's bigger than smaller. And so how do we know that it doesn't get pumped up during design to start including curbs and other stuff that jacks the price up? We've seen that on projects before.
What's that?
We've seen that on projects before.
No, I understand. I don't know if Alain's in the, Mr. Gauthier there. But again, I think that's why we work with construction and infrastructure services to ensure that what we're proposing is affordable. Because we also have budgets in terms of trying to build these type of facilities.
My next question is then, I guess, for finance. Our last DC bylaw was not predicated on these standards. And so when is the DC bylaw going to be updated so we're collecting enough to actually pay for these new roads?
I'll answer just the actual cost to put this compared to the old ones is less because now one thing we've removed is the median for the most part, and if we do put a median, it's a lot thinner. And the cost actually to build, when you build the cycling lane on the road, you have to build the full infrastructure of the roadway. Yeah. When you put the cycle track off-road, you don't have to, and there's actually a cost savings from that perspective. So we've estimated that based on all the projects that are in the affordable plan between now and 2031, it would save about $12 million in costs.
And so which roads or which projects are coming into the affordable plan now if we're saving $12 million?
Well, these are the ones that were identified through the transportation master plan.
Fair enough, but if we're saving $12 million, when are we going to get an update on which?
Budget, probably.
Budget? Are we sure? Because that's in a couple of weeks. A lot of work to do if it hasn't been started.
Well, we do have the chair of transportation here, not to throw you under a bus here or anything. Councillor Chair Aglai is with us. While you think about that, I'm going to put you back on the list and go to Councillor Couchet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Phil, pour la présentation. I appreciate the work that in terms of the framework and standardizing the design and cutting costs and the speed of the design. Had a couple of questions. The design, and it's certainly our desire, certainly my desire, to incorporate the variety of modes of transportation in our on our roads. Page 3 of the report, at the bottom of page 3, talks about medians on arterial roads and the need for medians and how a road under 70 kilometers would not need a median. And my question relates to safety of all the users. We have a situation where we could have in a cross section of a road going from left to right, if you will, a sidewalk, a cycle track, a transit lane, a travel lane, and then the mirror on the other side. When there is no median and a left-hand turning vehicle would not potentially not see a cyclist that is coming up beside a bus, overtaking a bus that might be stopped, and the left-hand turning vehicle would say the bus is stopped, I'm going to execute my left-hand turn lane, and the cyclist is coming up hidden. How do we, and that is not completely out of the question. We see it on the recent rebuild of Saint Laurent, which is an arterial road. The speed is less than 70 kilometers an hour. No median was required. So my question is to staff, how can we incorporate the safety of all the users in the road in that design, given that the recommendations of the report that says that a median is not required, and that we want to the sustainability, the access to businesses is of course important. But let me stop there and let you comment on what I've said so far.
Yeah, so when we talk about no medians less than 70 kilometers an hour, there's also a caveat that if there's safety issues or if there's multiple accesses where there might be, and I think of Saint Laurent Boulevard that was just reconstructed where there was no median and we just installed a median. In that case, you've got multiple movements. It's not to say that the median may not go in, but our recommendation from the start, unless there's a safety implication, is that the median shouldn't go in. Because we also want to, when you start separating movements and have medians and things like that, it does increase speeds, because the comfort level from a motorist perspective is, well, I'm in my lane, I'm good to go. If you've got opposing traffic that's a little closer to you, it generally decreases. And we see that more in the urban areas of the city. And so what we're trying to do with building better, smarter suburbs is in the suburbs where in the past we've always put medians. So the examples I showed here with Strandherd, if you look, the development, all the lots are back facing the road. So you've got this roadway that just promotes high speeds, and then once the road gets built, we get complaints from pedestrians, cyclists that cars are going too fast. But the road's been developed to promote those higher speeds, because from a driver's perspective, driving on that road at 70 or 80 kilometers an hour doesn't feel uncomfortable, because you've got wide lanes, you've got wide space between any development. When you get more into the urban areas where you start to have more accesses, the hope is you don't need to have medians, but if we start to see that there's potential for collisions or there's multiple accesses, or in this case there's a bus rapid transit, and we don't want to have those interactions from a safety perspective, the median may be the final solution to do, but it's not this thing that we're going to go starting off, we shall put a median. It'll be more, let's look at the whole design and context, and if there's the requirement for a median from a safety perspective or from a history.
But this applies to not only new builds, but rebuilding of roads, and not only in the suburbs, but in the urban core, in the outer urban core. So the question is, at what stage will those safety concerns, those interactions between all the users of the road be taken into consideration?
It would be during the design stage. So one of the we do in our group is when we know that a road's getting rebuilt, we'll take a look at the collisions along the corridor to see if there's patterns. So if we start to see a high number of left turning movements, if we start to see rear end collisions at intersections because of high right turn movements or at accesses, we'll take a look at that and work with infrastructure service to say.
But my point is, the new design of the road and introducing cycle tracks introduces a new a new element, up to 5 traveling lanes in each direction with pedestrians, cyclists, transit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only in bus rapid transit, it's just a transit priority lane that might cause that.
So again, we look at the context of that design to determine, this is more of a guideline in terms of these are the elements that we want to put into the design. If at the end of the day we see that because of X, Y, and Z, this is more appropriate and we need to put medians or we need to do some separations or even where the sidewalk and the cycle track are, those designs can be done. So I think going back to the previous question is this isn't set in stone in terms of of what the cross section shall look like. This is the recommended where you start off with, but you need to look at the context of the street. So 2 streets may have similar widths of roadway, but because of the context or the land use next to it, they may look different at the end of the day when they're rebuilt.
So what organizations would be involved in that design? What mechanism? Would it be the police? It's not just statistical data. Is it Safer Roads Ottawa? Is it?
Yeah. So we would look
who
like
gets involved?
Yeah. So from our like in traffic services, we would get involved. Our road safety folks would get involved. Our people in traffic operations, so the traffic signal operations, would be involved. Our traffic assessment specialists would be involved, and we would be working with the project manager through the design stage as providing input, and then that would be taken by the project manager, who would be consulting with, he's got more internal stakeholders, he's got external stakeholders, counselors, to come up with the preferred design that we can all live with.
Okay. Is there a mechanism? Is there an outside audit or other mechanism that can be employed to get that fresh set of eyes that?
Yeah, we've done that in the past as well.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Are you speaking to this? This is a report on suburbs and new roads that we make plan for. Is that right?
Yes.
So I just want to point that out. This is not across the city. This is as we build new arterials.
But I think
we're not as we reno them, because we have a complete street plan already that's in effect for that.
Okay, but I think it applies also to rebuilds.
Well, the concepts of what we're proposing here would be used when we do a rehabilitation of a road. And again, to your question on, we do have peer reviews that are done if there's a specific issue where, I know we get in situations where residents don't always sort of like what staff are saying, so we'll get a third-party evaluation to be an independent review. So those things are done, but again, those are issue by issue.
Okay. Thank you. I simply wanted to put that safety lens, the safety of cyclists and pedestrians and people getting off the bus on the table, because it only talked about it very briefly, and there's absolutely a situation where there could be a conflict, and the reputation of the city and the safety of our citizens is so.
Well, good questions, and I just wanted to clarify whether or not you were talking globally in the city or specific to the suburbs, which was the reason for the report, and a different and somewhat of quite a different lifestyle, actually. Anyway, you and I have a side to talk about that. I don't need to bore other people with anything I might have to add. Councillor Kadri and then Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Landry, or somebody sitting beside you, can go back to the slide that you showed cross-section of Hazeldean Road and also Trim Road, but Hazeldean is where my concerns are, or question regarding Hazeldean. So if you look at that slide, over on your left-hand side or the top portion of the slide, you see the commercial development, you see a boulevard, then you see a sidewalk, and then you see a city boulevard. Because there's a commercial boulevard, then a sidewalk, then a city boulevard. My question when this BBS started way back when was, is there a possibility for the city to look at that boulevard, the internal boulevard, and see if we can work with the developers of commercial sites all along Hazeldean Road in order to make that one boulevard rather than two, one for the maintenance by the commercial development and one with city maintenance? Is that a feasible request, or?
Madam Chair, the reason we're here at Planning Committee and at the table with Mr. Laundrie is exactly for that reason, is that we want to make sure that there's more seamless coordination between the right-of-way that is built and the land uses that abut that right-of-way, and especially in the case of arterials, we have had a number of challenges where the pieces don't connect or there's a difficult connection that's made between them. So it's very much our intent and our input through this group has been to really analyze the purpose of each of the spaces that are allocated within the right-of-way and how they will work with what then becomes, on the land use side of things, minimum setbacks or maximum setbacks, as the case may be, active frontage requirements, as the case may be, and direction is provided in greenfields through community design plans or secondary plans to start to put some language that will attach the pieces. So I would say, Madam Chair, that we're very much at the table when it comes to that improved coordination on all these pieces.
Thank you for that, Mr. Migueles, and that's what my concern was initially when I raised that number of years ago, the fact that there is an opportunity to work with the developers or work with the builders of that commercial development in this case, and see how we can work with them to combine that boulevard into one, making better use of the space, and also making one operation cost going forward, especially in that development on Hazeldean, where we've actually put a couple of public streets through the commercial development attached to the future residential development behind it. So I just wanted to make that point again. I think that as a city, we should be looking at that coordination with the other partners on the street. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Blais.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess you've asked me to do an inquiry, so my inquiry is the adoption of the new infrastructure standards is said to save somewhere near $12 million. What road projects is this quantum being saved, and how does the savings impact the list of affordable projects?
You know, it's going to be interesting. One of the projects, which probably isn't on the list yet, but it's just starting this year, and it's a very big one because it includes an overpass in Barrhaven, the Strandherd, between the Home Depot and Mara Vista. It's an extremely large project, and it's going to be, I'm hoping, MUPs and things like that, because that's really the way, you know, that Barrhaven moves for sure. Anyway, we'll look forward to more information on that. Anybody else have any questions? I'm sure, Councillor Hubley, you have something to say.
Okay, Madam Chair, just to thank them for their work, because as you know, we've been involved in the monthly meetings and sometimes more frequently the monthly as well on developing this. It's been quite a journey over a couple of years, and really do appreciate the work. I understand Councillor Blais' concerns with that style, and as you say, we worked through it out on the one that Councillor Kadri and I share, and we both agreed with your position and thought it was a really good compromise, so thank you for that. And I encourage my colleagues to give it a road test. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so thank you, everybody. So on the Building Better and Smarter Suburbs and Infrastructure Standards Review, arterial road cross sections. Hang on, everybody. I want to, Ted Phillips. Ted, you want to come up and say something? Ted was part of the sponsor group.
Just to say thank you, Madam Chair, you and Councillor Hubley and members of staff. Fel Petty was also instrumental in a lot of the work that went into this project, and it's a good idea when we can all work together and try to save land so that we have less need to expand the city in the future when we're making more efficient use of land. So it's really a win-win for everybody on this. So thank you very much.
Thanks for saying that, Ted. I mean, I think this is like a 5-year project, really. I think that it started that long ago, and then we really dug in deep about 3 years ago, and I want to thank you for your part, Ted, and the sponsor group that you were on, the Ottawa Home Builders, and each of them that played a part. Mary, as you know, was here speaking, but there have been others that have played significant roles, but certainly Lamé has been the longest, and you as well, Phil. I don't think, Peter, you were on from the beginning. I don't think so, but I mean, you've still been on this file a long time. It's incredible work, and now we're almost finished marrying the infrastructure standards review with it, and the cities absolutely, and in particular suburbs, are going to benefit because of it for decades to come. Thanks a lot. So it's carried? I asked you? Carried. Okay, so the next one that we've held is application to alter 61 Park Road, a property located in the Park Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we do have some speakers on this. We're not having a presentation. So let's go to the delegations first, and then you can ask questions during that and of staff as well. Okay? So I'll just wait to call the delegation until that's out of the way. Is this your presentation or Miss Susan D'aquino's? So, okay. All right. Ms. D'aquino is the chair of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Committee. Yeah. Thanks for putting the picture up for reference. Welcome.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Your Built Heritage Subcommittee has recommended approval of this application. I have nonetheless come to express the concerns of the Heritage Committee of the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association with the application. As you may know, our responsibility is to meet with people who want to develop properties in Rockcliffe and to encourage them to bring their proposals in line with the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Plan and the earlier protections that remain in place while that plan is being appealed. Sometimes this is not difficult. We have very good meetings, and we can support the applications. Sometimes, though, as in this case, we do have problems with the applications. We tell the applicant what they are, and if they do not feel they can deal with our concerns, then we cannot support their applications. In spite of what our new heritage plan says, we can see the heritage character of the community continue to erode. We do see bigger and bigger houses being built, and they eat up more and more of the park-like setting of houses. It is this park-like setting, as you know, that lies at the heart of the heritage character of Rockcliffe, and it's done so since it was first conceived as a park-like place for houses 150 years ago. So I'd like to take a few moments to explain our views with respect to this particular application. In short, we believe that the application does not meet key provisions of both the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Plan and the earlier guidelines that are still in place, as I mentioned. 61 Park Road is an important Grade 1 heritage property. It dates from 1908 and was designed by the prominent architect by the name of Nofke. It is presently in a state of disrepair, and we welcome the undertaking of the owner to bring this property back to life. However, we submit that the proposal before you does not meet the requirement that alterations to houses in Rockcliffe, and I quote, must protect and enhance the existing and architectural quality of the building and the site. First, I will refer to the historical and architectural quality of the building that is supposed to be protected. It is proposed that the roof be removed and replaced with one with a much steeper pitch. I would suggest that Nofke would roll over in his grave at this suggestion. The new roof will be higher, much more prominent, and dominate his structure in a way that he never intended. So I would sometimes ask, who cares? Well, the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Plan cares about these things, and the Standards and Guidelines for Conservation of Historic Places in Canada cares. The roof is one of what is called the character-defining elements of the house. As such, quote, it must be maintained according to the Heritage Plan, and it must be, quote, conserved according to the Historic Places Standards of Canada. The applicant mentions that increasing the roof pitch would make it comply with the Ontario Building Code regarding ceiling heights. This kind of implies that the building code requires a change, but it doesn't. The building code does not require that historic buildings be renovated to adjust to today's building code standards. So my first point is about protecting the integrity of the architecture of this building. My second point, I will refer to the increase in mass and lot coverage that this proposal entails. The extensive additions on both sides and on the back would more than double the lot coverage and the footprint of the house. It would increase it by 120%, to be precise. And in other words, the house is going to be more than twice the size of the existing house and eat up more than twice as much of the landscape setting. It includes such things as a 3-car garage. We submit that additions on this scale are contrary to the Heritage Plan provision that says, and I quote, the existing landscape character of the lot will be preserved when additions are constructed. It is not being preserved. Additions on this scale are also contrary to the earlier guidelines that say, and I quote, additions to existing buildings shall protect and enhance significant qualities of the existing landscape, shall, I quote, protect and enhance the existing historical quality of the site. Permitting a grade 1 house to more than double in size has other consequences. Our new Heritage Plan was carefully crafted to establish some control on the building of oversized houses, as I think you know. It does so by saying that the size of new houses must be consistent with the grade 1 houses around it. Now, all of a sudden, one of those grade 1 houses that sets the limit will more than double in size. Allowing this to happen undermines a key purpose of the Heritage Plan. To conclude,
in conclusion,
one sentence, yes. To conclude, all development in Rockcliffe Park and other conservation districts is meant to abide by the provisions of heritage plans and guidelines approved by the city. I believe that I have given good evidence that this is not the case with the application before you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Aquino? Well, thank you very much for coming out. Robert Martin is the architect for the applicant. Ed, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee, for the opportunity to present this morning. Notwithstanding the earlier comments, we'd like to reframe the project approach. The existing heritage structure is to be restored. As was mentioned, it's in extremely poor state. Virtually all of the interior has been gutted to remove asbestos designated substances. The approach on the existing building is one of restoration, and the additions to the side are set back and smaller than the existing house. And this is one of the key guidelines when adding to heritage buildings, that the additions be distinguishable, of their own time, and in this sense, we've gone to great lengths to position the mass of the addition to the north of the property. The existing garage, which is quite unsightly and faces Elmwood, was proposed to be demolished and is now tucked away behind the rear of the house. I want to stress that we meet every zoning provision for this structure, both in terms of height, mass, setbacks, and furthermore in terms of the Heritage Conservation District provisions. We've also want to that the primary heritage character of Rockcliffe Park is not its houses, but the landscape character. And in this sense, we have despite the additions, we are still leaving more than 3/4 of the lot as green space, and existing dead and diseased trees are being removed and are being replanted at a ratio of 2 to 1. The driveway access is not resulting in any loss of trees. In fact, we're tucking it between two existing mature trees. And in this sense, we feel we're being very sympathetic and sensitive to the primary character of Rockcliffe Park. We had met with city staff and the Rockcliffe Residents Association and received a number of comments and feedback. And the design that you see before you reflects these beneficial improvements. It's resulted in changes such as, smaller mass, smaller footprint, and so forth. The concern about the roof, I want to say that we've worked on a number of Nofke buildings, including the one next door, and currently working on Nofke's post office at the corner of Elgin Street and Spark Street. So I'm very familiar with Nofke's designs. And I will say, despite the grade 1 listing, this is not one of his better works. And the roof itself is, despite it being changed to a 12-12 pitch, is entirely in character with the remaining houses. We've done a survey of all the neighboring houses, and 8 of the 9 all have a 12-12 pitch. So in this sense, we're still in the height limit, and the mass and detailing of all the rafter tails and so forth is being reproduced. So we feel this is a very approach. And I guess lastly, we've worked on approximately 30 projects in Rockcliffe Park for which the firm has been recognized. And I say this to demonstrate our commitment to Rockcliffe Park heritage conservation and our participation over the decades. The approach for this project maintains this kind of sensitivity, and we would request your consideration for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Councillor Leeper has a question.
Thank you, Chair. The piece of this that jumped out for me was the change in the roof line. You've noted that it is going to be consistent with or in keeping with the character of neighboring houses. But how in keeping is it with the architect style of doing roofs? Is there a discernible thrust of these works around a particular pitch of roof? Is it all over the map? Because it's less, I'm less interested in what's around than I am in keeping with the architect's intent for how this building should look.
So, Madam Chair, I would say that Nofke's work could be characterized as highly eclectic. He was quite adept at designing and constructing in many different styles. The property right next door employs both 7/12 and 12/12 roof pitches, so there's a ratio of rise over run. So I would not say that Nofke would be constrained to any pitch. And the other thing we know from the property next door, and I haven't had the chance to do further research in this, is a number of these houses were constructed at a period of economic uncertainty. We already know for the one next door were financial difficulties during construction. And it's my speculation that the original roof may have even been intended to be steeper, consistent with the one next door, and people ran short of money. But that's for another day to investigate. But all that to say, both from Nofke's and the surrounding context, which is one of the criteria when designing additions as to what the fit is, that this roof is appropriate and consistent. It's not going to overpower or dominate the house or the neighboring properties.
Okay. You mentioned, and I've forgotten the figure with respect to the landscape character, how much of the lot is remaining undeveloped. What was that number?
So it's just over 75% is going to remain as green space. This is a large lot. In that sense, larger lots can take larger properties, if you like, given our clients' wishes for the development. And I recognize fully that the Heritage Conservation District expects or suggests that there be a range of property sizes and building sizes as well.
Is there a number, and it's difficult to quantify, which makes our job challenging when you're confronted with a term like protecting the landscape character? If this proposed new development were to take over 50% of the lot, would it still be in keeping with the landscape character? I mean, is there some threat that we should be looking at before we determine that, in fact, something is no longer in keeping with the landscape character?
Well, there in different areas of the district, there are different coverage percentages allowed, but typically the threshold is around 30%. So that, that's, it was, I think, a benchmark that demonstrates, if you like, the primacy of landscape character over built form.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for coming out today. Does anyone have any questions of staff? Comment, Councillor and Chair Nussbaum?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to briefly mention that this item did come before Built Heritage at our last meeting. There was a good discussion on it. I think members were informed in agreeing with the staff recommendation in part by the fact that this application does respect both the floor space index and the lot coverage provisions within the zoning bylaw. That said, given that there are different interpretations of some of the key words in the Heritage Conservation District Plan, like subordinate to, and footprint and others, I did recommend that staff engage in a discussion with members of the Rockville Park Heritage Conservation Committee just to talk through a little bit that interpretation and see whether or not some sort of an interpretive guideline or additions to the glossary might be appropriate. So I just thought I would debrief on those points. Thank you.
Thanks, that's good direction. Thank you, Mr. Martin. So on this item, application to alter 61 Park Road, a property located in Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. Carried. Thank you. Okay, the next item that's held is held by Councillor Blais, and it's the zoning bylaw amendment, part of 6211 Renault Road. It's in Councillor Middick's ward. Staff coming up, Steve. Hi, Steve. I don't know what your name is, but I'm sure you'll tell me. Jeff McEwen. I don't know. Miguel's working for us? I have no idea. On this, why are you up here already? Are you working for the city? You maybe want to wait till I call you. Okay, so we're not having a presentation on this. Does anyone mind that we have our delegation at the same time up here so that you can ask questions of both if necessary? Is that good? So Councillor Blais, I think you're the one that held this, so we'll go with you first. Anyone else want to speak to this item? Let me know. Well, it depends on the area covered by Councillor Blais. Sure. I'm just asking right now. Councillor Blais?
Yeah, perfect. I'm looking at the report. I think it's the attachment perhaps, where it's got the kind of subdivision laid out, but the lines are not entirely clear. And I guess I'm just, the southerly road there is Renault Road. I'm trying to ascertain if this subdivision proceeds all the way north to Brian Coburn or not. It doesn't look that way. I just want to make sure that I'm reading that properly.
Madam Chair, this is a draft of the draft plan of subdivision. We have, here we go. We have Renault Road on this side, Rue de la Mélodie, and then the green space, and it doesn't continue on all the way through.
Perfect. And so while this, I'm sure, is being considered a greenfield development, I recall there being active farming not so long ago, and I'm wondering what happened to the farm buildings and farmhouses that may have been on the site to support that activity.
There was an old farmhouse up against Renault Road.
Yeah.
During pre-consultation, we asked about the heritage value. There was no significant heritage value on that property, and the building has been removed.
And so who determined there was no significant heritage value of the 150-year-old farmhouse?
We consulted with the heritage planners.
Okay. And was the demolition permit issued for the removal of the building?
Yes, there was.
Pardon me?
Madam Chair, yes, there was.
Okay. Yeah. It's just a shame that some of our rural heritage features aren't being protected when we have constant debates about protecting the same. Anyways, okay, I'm fine, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a question on building permit. Frank Bedin's here. I just spotted him over there. So when we have a formal process for demolition permit for heritage assessed and designated properties, what's the process for, in this case where staff went to the heritage folks, they said, we've looked at it, it doesn't, meet the requirements of being designated. And then what then is when they apply for a demolition of the existing building, what's the difference between the two of them? I mean, what do you need to do from a notification perspective?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a standard process, all demolition permits are circulated over to our colleagues in the Heritage Unit, and they actually have an opportunity to take a look at the application, including the site plan that was provided, and they're required to sign off on that application as well at that time. So it is standard practice.
So I just have another question. You know how we've been having a lot of fun with the Heritage Register lately, with the last two that have come before us. And I'm just wondering, would this building have been, if it was still there, would it have been captured? When would it have been captured? Well, Court, you're here too. Yeah. So, for example, I think it wouldn't be rural anymore because it's within the urban boundary. How would you have reviewed it? And I'm not trying to make a deal about this. I'm just trying to get for the future. Okay.
So, Chair, that's exactly the purpose of the register. The register will include all properties in the rural area or in those areas that are semi-rural, semi-suburban. Okay. While I'm not familiar with the specifics of this particular, our staff would have reviewed it and determined that it didn't warrant any sort of protection.
Okay, thanks. So, Councillor Hubley and Councillor Tierney, I think, have questions. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along those lines, I'm curious too from staff, as you said, we've had a number of these cases come forward. Is there a score sheet for when this was reviewed for heritage nation or not?
There wouldn't have been a score sheet, Councillor, but we would have used the criteria that we've been using to assess properties that we're adding to the Heritage Register right now in this analysis.
Okay, so using that criteria, then following along with what the chair was just asking, if you use that criteria, it would not have got onto the registry? Is that what you're saying?
Unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of this file. I will go back and speak on to it with Heritage staff who have since left the room. But they would have applied the criteria that we're using for the Heritage Register to assess this specific property and determined that it didn't warrant any form of heritage protection.
When we go through this process, we don't notify the ward councillor or notify the community that this is ongoing, that we're reviewing a 150-year-old farmhouse to decide whether it should be demolished or not?
Typically, because there is no heritage protection on the actual property, there is no rule for the community as part of our regular process. That being said, where there's a sensitive property or a sensitive residential unit, we do typically reach out to the ward councillor to seek their opinion on the matter.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I wouldn't mind hearing from Heritage staff how that process took place, given the other files that we've dealt with. So if deferring this or if they can get that information to us before council, I'd be happy.
Well, let's just ask them to get it for council. You can move deferral. I personally am not going to support it. And maybe a better way of dealing with it would be to have on our agenda discussion of the process for demolitions. I think it would be important to have, especially since we're going through the heritage registry, right? And we have, like, the whole city. We've done downtown, Sandy Hill, Old Ottawa East, Old Ottawa South, and I think next we're going into Councillor Leap's, so a long way away from suburbia. But then we are doing, and it's all in this term, isn't it, Councillor? Court? It is in this term, I
Correct.
think.
By the
you
end of
told
this
us.
term of council of the whole city complete.
So I think that it would be of value if you could, before Christmas, have a report on that talks about that, so we can have that discussion.
Yeah, with some reference to this specific example too, because it's one that boggles the mind that it was just trash like that. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Get that direction then, Court, and let us know when you, what kind of timeline you need. November 28th, I think, is a date, but you could do the one in December, but just as long as it's before Christmas, I'd appreciate it. Right?
Yeah, I think Councillor Hubley got a lot of what I wanted in there, but I just wanted to point out if this was in Rockcliffe, and no disrespect to my colleague sitting next to me, we'd pay a lot more attention to this. Just because this is a 150-year-old farmhouse, it seems like it was just left altogether off the plate. And I think now we're actually seeing where there is benefit to the Heritage Registry. This is going to be a good thing, but I'll also be looking for this. Court, can we get this information before council? Is this realistic?
With respect to this particular property, Councillor?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is gone. All right, thank you. So,
Can we also add the direction to staff that if anything else comes up in the meantime, similar to this, over a 100-year-old building, that they actually notify the ward councillor as well, or demolish them? Not the day before. Thank you, Councillor Brocklinton, you're right. Ms. Sneddon, is there something we can do as a direction to staff
We'll
here
get back to
to
you before
present
council meeting.
or protect that this does not happen again?
It's not Ms. Sneddon's.
Okay.
Okay? It is Court Curry's.
Okay.
And Court is going to undertake to bring a report forward to talk about that in conjunction with you, Frank. And as far as this particular item, Court is going to provide before the next, before council, which is in a couple of weeks, you're going to, is it November the 5th? No, it'll be the 12th, I guess. Whatever the date is, you're going to have the information on this specific item, right? And then I also want to understand what notification, if any, you give to the elected official in the area. Okay? Those two things before council. Thank you. Good? Yep. All right, so on the item, does it carry? Okay. Okay, well then why don't we just do yeas and nays? Well, we'll do yeas and nays. Councillor Blais?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli? Yes. Councillor Cluche?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Nussbaum? Yes. Councillor Kadri?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tierney?
No.
Myself, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 3. Thank you, and we'll look forward to that information. Oh, I forgot to, did you need to say anything? It's too late now, but if you want to say something, go ahead.
I will.
I mean, I'm sure that you would have been speaking in favor of the application.
I will. I want to
You know what the problem is, Miguel? You shouldn't have come up when you came up.
I was trying to move things
Right?
along.
That's why I was asking you,
Agreed.
Are you working for the city?
Well, there's no room at the other end, so.
No, but I didn't call you.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
We were eager to deal with the item. I apologize. Maybe I just want to make just one very quick comment in that Glenview on previous occasions has not been insensitive to heritage assets on their property, and they did go through a typical process that you do go through with staff to identify them. And as Councillor Hubley may recall, there was a heritage asset in the Hope Side roads, and they did a very good job of accommodating that, moving it if necessary, and restoring it. So it's not that Glenview is insensitive to issues of heritage preservation. They simply went through a municipal process and were directed to file the demolition permit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. The next held item is zoning bylaw amendment, 1620 and 1636 Maple Grove Road, a very, very old application in the Stittsville area. Was this even part of Stittsville when it was first, I don't know that it was. I don't think it was. Huh? Yeah, it wasn't part of Stittsville. That's how far back it goes. It would have been in Councillor Feltmate's area, I think. right? Yeah. So it's a really old one, so it's kind of weird. Don't come up yet, Mr. Yam. Just tell. Oh, it's Miguel coming up. Definitely don't come up again, Miguel. Thank you. Hold him back.
Holding it back.
Okay, so now, did you want to have anything that you want to say up front, Councillor Kadri, since this is now in your area, but...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to make the opening statement as to what the action going forward with me is that motion that I may be putting forward. This application for the colleagues, just to let you know, and as Councillor mentioned, it's been around since 2004 in terms of its filing and moving forward. And it's also gone through an OMB appeal through these residents, some of the residents in the community. And the Ridgecraft Home subsequently also filed an appeal in 2007 based on the city not making a decision within the 120 timeline, the requested timeline. My concern with this is, and like I said, I'll read out the motion in a minute, is the fact that some of the questions that need to be looked at and reviewed need to be done, in my opinion, because the application back in 2004, is the fact that the public is looking for some of those responses coming back to the community. And the issue for me is that in 2004, I wasn't on council at the time, and the decision was made that Councillor Wilkinson mentioned about by the region. So the community that exists besides this area now didn't really have an opportunity to put their comments in. There were comments made when the public meeting was originally held for this file, and those comments are registered in the report for your convenience. And it's just, like I said, I still have some questions that I need to clarify and attend to. And that's why I'm going to be requesting from the committee a request to defer this item till November 14th Planning Committee meeting. And I'll read out the motion. Whereas the city is considering a zoning application for Ridgecraft Homes development at 1620 and 1636 Maple Grove Road, which was originally submitted in 2004. And whereas the public consultation for the plan of subdivision was undertaken a number of years ago, and whereas the application predates the city's development application website, so the zoning application was not listed on the website for public consult, and whereas the city has met the legal requirements for notification, however, providing a deferral will allow interested residents to submit comments onto the zoning application. Therefore, be it resolved that this application be deferred to the Planning Committee meeting on November 14th.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Shirelli.
Yeah, I was here in 2004.
Was I?
And you know, I'm thinking of process here, and so I guess question for legal staff would be, first of all, does the applicant even need to be here today?
Madam Chair, the applicant does not need to be here today. However, Ridgecraft has followed the appropriate process by re-engaging the city on the continuing zoning application that is presently open before the Ontario Municipal Board.
Okay, now I understand there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, but this is well the time period that an applicant would normally face. If this were a criminal tribunal and someone was facing charges on a serious crime, they would be dismissed. But we are dealing with this application. So what are the options to the applicant if they were to decide not to hang around for our deferral?
Well, we'll ask them what they'll do, but they have the right to just withdraw their application here and just go with the process that they've been engaged in and delayed on because of, as you mentioned, but you didn't speak to, all the things the good folks here from Canada knows that went on that paralyzed growth in the Canada area for 5 years. at least.
I intentionally didn't get into those.
I know.
Okay.
I think other people will, but they have the legal, because I asked Mr. Mark this yesterday, they have the legal right to just say, we're withdrawing our application.
Yeah.
And I might add,
so then
this is a public process. This is advertised, it's on an agenda, and there is an opportunity. And in fact, we have heard from Faith Blackyear, for example, know that she has some questions, and I trust that staff are going to respond to her before council, right?
Well, I have sat through many hearings on this over the years, and I don't quite understand why it's here, because most of them would have gone to the OMB by now. I could oh yeah, right.
And it is at the OMB.
So, but they could just stay there. They don't need to be here.
That's right, because if they withdraw their application, it doesn't take away from the fact that the application's live.
Yeah.
Right.
So, are there any other remedies open to the applicant besides just continuing on at the OMB?
No, Madam Chair, the board has jurisdiction over this matter should the applicant decide to go back to the OMB.
So what's the estimated time for completion of the OMB process?
Madam Chair, we are unable to state what the timeline is at the board at this presently.
And another question would be, if, for example, we support this application today and council does, there's still an appeal process, but it could be appealed by the two people that wrote in. But it's still going to go back to the process that Richcraft could have stayed with in the first place, correct?
Okay. I'll tell you the answer is yes, but that's sort of what I was getting at about the other remedies available, because the way I look at it is Richcraft, if we were to pass a deferral, they could just withdraw the application, go to the OMB, and then there's no appeal open to anybody.
Other than the people,
and you get a made in Toronto decision, which may not be that great.
Other than the people from 2004 that participated in that, correct, Ms. Anta?
Or anyone who's here today.
Or anyone today.
Yeah. I believe that there were interested parties at the time that the appeal was filed, but I do not know if any have appealed or asked to be joined to this appeal at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So, basically, I know Councillor Caudry's done a lot of hard work on this. Personally, I don't like decisions going to the OMB, because sometimes you get a decision that the community is completely aghast at. And then, and you can't do anything about it once that happens. Secondly, if we do defer, the applicant just withdraws, then the community has no opportunity for appeal after that. And finally, I think we do have some responsibility to deliver some timely process. And I know over a decade later, it's a little late to say that we're trying for as someone who's lived through a lot of the machinations that have brought us to this, and I'm not sure an extra 2 weeks is going to help the community much more than we've already done. I think the council pretty much made every concern possible aware to members of council.
Right, so this is on deferral. So if you're speaking to deferral, if deferral doesn't pass, then we're going to deal with the item, and then you can get into all the rest of it. So speaking to deferral, and if you're not speaking to deferral, then I'll hold your place on the list.
I'll speak to deferral, but keep me on the list to speak to the item as well. As you alluded to, Madam Chair, I remember the years where growth was frozen in the West End, decisions couldn't get made. Many of our residents had to drive into Bell's Corners to get to go to a grocery store or a decent restaurant. and now they're getting KFC back. There's your plug, Rick. And I don't want to go back to those days. And something that's 13 years old, if we defer this and hold public consultations, I'd like to hear from staff, how many more files out there could we then do this? Are we going to spend the term revisiting decisions of 10, 15 years ago? Because if we do it for one, I think we have to do it for every single one that someone wants to bring forward. So can I get a response to that?
Well, we're speaking to deferral, so
Yeah,
if they have a response.
If we defer, does that mean that
Are there any other ones caught in
applications
the
can be
queue?
brought forward over, is there any statute of limitations or time limit to this that we can go back through? Because I can make quite a list if we want to start reviewing old
I
files.
think what you're looking for is, are there some that never came to an end result, that were caught up in the same kind of time warp that was caused through the Carp Creek, etc.?
If for any reason, is there something,
Are there others?
do we have the ability to go back in over, let's say, the last 20 years and pull all the files that we want to relook at?
Not if they've been passed, only
that
if they're in this
creating
situation. Yeah, only if they're in this situation. Well, so just to tie it into deferral, what you hear will be the determining factor, or whether you support deferral or not.
Oh, no, I still have questions to the motion. For deferral, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, but I still have questions to the report.
So I'm just going to ask Ms. Enta, are you aware of any other projects that have been caught in this time warp as well?
At present, Madam Chair, I'm unaware of any other properties that are caught in this type of situation.
And you, Mr. Moody, or you, Ms. Sweet Lindsay?
There's none that we're aware of or that come to mind at this point in time, but certainly we can try to take a look back at some of the systems.
Don't. You know what? We look to the future. We're looking forward at the city, okay? I mean, we're
That's the point of the question,
moving.
Madam Chair.
I know.
I don't want to go back over all these years.
So I'm going to also ask Miguel, when you come up, not yet, when you come up here, Miguel might actually know of some other ones out there. So, you can just comment if you're
I'm
aware.
sure if we approve this, there'll be people looking for files that could be brought back. I think that's a given to this. So
I don't know.
And I recall at the time, when those public meetings were held, it was before Councillor Kadri's time, but I remember some of the meetings I attended, you were at. They were held at what was then Scotiabank Place, or the Palladium. I might have even been back in the days of the Palladium, where a lot of people come in, like big tables, to talk about the Fernbank Community Design Plan, to talk about these applications, and guess what? They were all approved. So how this one hung out there and didn't get approved, I don't know, but I know a lot of members of the community had that opportunity to speak at that time. So.
Well, sure, and Fairwinds hadn't even started at the time, so the people that are living there now benefiting from it. But anyways, that's not about deferral. On deferral, who else wants to speak to deferral? Councillor Leeper, Councillor Brockington, Councillor Nussbaum.
Thanks. So on deferral, I'll just take a little jump to the left, a little step to the right.
That's not a big jump.
My question is actually for the councillor. The comments that I'm seeing in the consultation details in the report speak to really, should we have a development there or not? They don't speak necessarily to the zoning. The questions that you would hope to raise if there were a deferral, how specific are they to the zoning that is before us?
Thank you very much, Councillor, for your question. And the questions that the community has, up until now, what you've seen so far is referring to development itself going forward. And I understand and respect that, and I'll come back to the chair with another item on that particular piece. Having said that, in terms of the zoning of the area, and there are other extenuating issues related to this file that were brought forward due to not only this development, but the whole Canada West development at the time. Right. And it's based on that I'm looking for a deferral for the immediate residents of this area. I know there was consultation happened years ago at the CTC Center, or the Palladium Center at the time, and there were many involvements in there, but the concern for me is the current residents of the community in Fairwinds and Stittsville are not getting a say in this at the present time in terms of the zoning.
How close are those residents?
Well, some of them are right adjacent to this property going forward. I mean, parts of Fairwinds has been developed along the same corridor as this development will be happening between the Carp River and the Fairwinds subdivision.
So on that, can I have a comment from staff on the Fairwinds community would have been designed knowing that this was an application that was live, correct? So that you wouldn't have, it just makes sense. I know, you see, here's the problem. Councillor Shirelli and I were here when this actually happened, and we were on planning committee, right? But other than, Ms. Nedden, you weren't here. Not in here. You were here, but you weren't in planning department. I mean, you look around the room. I think Councillor Terwire, Don was here. I don't think you were then. Were you, Derek? Louise, but you were on the west end. No. See, so there's very few people to be answering the questions. I guess the thing is, what do you hope to accomplish with a deferral in 2 weeks' time? On zoning.
On zoning.
Not on let's dig up Canada West and before it became Stittsville and all that stuff. What is your hope in having that?
Chair, that is what I'm really thinking about is, are there going to be comments specific to the zoning that's before us as opposed to simply giving permission to develop this plot?
And again, I want to just emphasize to everybody in the room the fact that the community, if they have questions for zoning, and I know we haven't seen some of as of yet in terms of the submissions that have been made, and those submissions, and I'm going to ask the chair after about those submissions in a minute. The zoning issue is where I'm interested in from the community's perspective. If they have any comments, let's give them that 2-week deferral period to see if those comments come forward, and if they do, great. If they don't, then we're okay. At least we provided that opportunity.
But there also are 2 weeks before council. There are. Right. To speak to the zoning issues before council supports it if it goes forward. Councillor Brockington, then Councillor Nussbaum on deferral.
My first question was, what's the net benefit of doing this? And I think you've touched upon that. I want to ask staff, aren't there automatic, mandatory, public consultations that were required, led by the city and/or the local councillor before a report of this magnitude? And I don't mean 13 or 15 years ago, but has that not been done? What has been done prior?
So the requirements were met for public consultation, but they were quite some time ago. They were back in 2004, 2005.
But this is coming before us because it's a revision?
No.
So the required consultation that's occurred currently is that the people that had raised concerns or indicated they had an interest in the file through the original public circulation were notified. There was
from people who were interested from 15 years ago
and on the website.
And again, remember the questions that Councillor Shirelli was asking. They don't need to be here. They do not need to be here. They did not need to bring an application forward. So actually, by bringing the application forward, which they discussed with their lawyer and with Mr. Mark, and they thought this was an appropriate process to come forward, and because it is so long ago, and go through the process, but the process is what it is, and from legal's opinion, they have met all the requirements of this process. And I asked them yesterday if the deferral, because that's when Councillor Kadri and I were talking, if the deferral passes at this, they're pulling their application, so we'll have nothing to discuss. And it'll still be the same process. It'll still go forward the same as it was in 2004.
Can I ask staff what the risks are of us proceeding with a deferral, and what are the risks of not proceeding with a deferral?
Okay, well, I don't know which staff to ask, but
well, I'd like to hear from legal.
I mean, if I was staff, I know what I'd say. Yeah. The risk is they're going to pull the thing. The risk to us, if we do, Ms. Anta, do you have an answer on the hypothetical?
I do, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, the board draft approved this subdivision application, and the zoning application that is before committee today is to implement that draft approval. So while any appeal any bylaw that's adopted by council, being a zoning bylaw under the Planning Act. So if we go forward with a deferral, as I understand it, the applicant may withdraw their application and then go with the current matter that is open in front of the board. And at that point, anyone wishing to appeal would have to ask for party status. So those are the risks. There are two mechanisms open to the applicant. This is a resurrection of an older zoning application to implement their subdivision, which has been draft approved.
Okay, I'm Councillor Nussbaum, and then I'm going to go with yeas and nays on deferral.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to get, I just have a few questions of clarification. It says
deferral.
That the draft plan of subdivision was submitted in 2013 and approved in 2016 by staff. I guess my question there is, why didn't, at that stage, I presume the plan of subdivision was approved predicated on the zoning from DR to residential third. Why wasn't the zoning application submitted at that stage? Was that because of the OMB hearing? I'm just curious why the delay.
The OMB application was, the rezoning application was actually submitted in 2004 in conjunction with the original submission draft plan approval.
Okay, and so the draft plan of subdivision was approved by staff under delegated authority, predicated on the eventual zoning being residential third or whatever it is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, and to Councillor Caudry, during the process when the draft plan of subdivision was being considered by staff, were you aware of that, and was there an opportunity to have a public consultation on the draft plan of subdivision?
Thank you very much, Mr. Leeper, for your question. Councillor, the issue when it came back in 2016, there wasn't enough time provided to us in terms of having that public consultation based on the fact that the public consultation was already held back in 2004.
And so if in an ideal world, if this were deferred, would you imagine, would you or your residents be seeking changes in the draft plan of subdivision? Or what would change, again, in an ideal world, from what's been approved by staff already in the draft plan of subdivision? I'm just trying to understand the relationship. If that's already approved and now we have a zoning application which is simply flipping it from DR to residential third, are you actually seeking changes in the draft plan of subdivision?
I'm not seeking changes to the draft plan of subdivision. What I'm looking for is just an opportunity for the community to come back with comments on that subdivision plan and say, look, we have some concerns. I know we've heard some concerns already, but they're a different matter, and give them that opportunity. That's all the opening I'm looking for in terms of going forward. So the community, as well as the council, has an opportunity to look at this file in today's standard, today's requirements, rather than looking back in 2004 and 2005.
Okay, my last question is to legal staff, which is that under paragraph 2 of the draft recommendation, there's reference to the consultation requirements under Bill 73. Is legal staff satisfied that the public meeting that took place in 2004 satisfies the requirements under Bill 73, which was passed, whatever, last year?
Madam Chair, legal is satisfied that the statutory notice provisions have been followed in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so yeas and nays on deferral, please. Deferral of the 1620 and 1636 Maple Grove zoning bylaw amendment. Councillor Blais?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
No.
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor Cloutier?
No.
Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Leeper?
No. Councillor
Nussbaum?
No.
Councillor Caudry? Yes. Vice Chair Tierney?
No.
And myself, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 9 to 1. But good job, Councillor Caudry, in trying to resurrect something that should have been dealt with and really would have been dealt with if there hadn't been that very large pause in all development of Canada. Really, it's mind-boggling that that was allowed to happen even. Part of the process, but it was mind-boggling. And it set this city on a course that has done nothing but cost us money. The level of risk and everything else, that it just is absolutely insane, and you're lucky you weren't there. Councillor Kadri, because now we're going to go to the item before us, which is the zoning, and I'm going to go to, now I'm going to ask while you're talking for Mr. Tremblay to come forward. Are you coming too, Kevin? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your comments about the process that's taken place. My concern still, and I know the deferral item is over, but just to make one more point about the information that I'm looking for, or going forward, that the community may be looking for, is you've all received some communications through Faith Blackware, as well as some of the other members of the community. If you haven't, I can forward that information on to you later today. What I would like staff to do is to come back with responses to those requests or to those questions to the community prior to council, if that's possible, Madam Chair.
And who's left on?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's, staff are already working on responses, just perhaps to make sure that staff are getting the same questions that the councillor is, we can connect afterwards to make sure that we have.
That would be great, that you connect and make sure that you're all on the same page and everything that you're hearing is they're hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Tremblay, Mr. Yam, you have 5 minutes.
It's really Miguel Tremblay, Foten Consultants, and Kevin Yem, Richcraft Group of Companies. It's really just to answer any questions. We appreciate the vote for not supporting the deferral. I do want to leave with the committee, though, that we didn't jump from 2004 to today, and I fully appreciate the councillors' interest in broadening the opportunity for public consultation, but we recall, if you will, that there were draft subdivision approvals that included public notification. There was an EA for the pump station, there was an EA for the restoration work. There has been many vehicles between those dates for the public to continue to be involved. The reality is the people that are still involved are the people that were involved in the appeals. There is a process of clearing conditions for the draft approval that will provide staff opportunities to review technical and respond to those inquiries. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and Kevin as well.
So to ask the question, had the deferral gone through, I asked you that yesterday, and you were just going to simply pull your application.
Yes, it wouldn't have been our desire to do so. We were quite happy to work with staff ever since our subdivision passed through the OMB. It was a very lengthy, costly process, so we thought that this would be the best way to handle this process. It was recommended by city legal staff and city staff that we do work together on where the draft plan goes and where the subsequent zoning goes. And as the lands become closer to development, this is the right time to do this. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you might as well stay there in case anybody has questions of you. Councillor Hubley. Anyone else want to get on the list?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to go back to what Councillor Kadri said about circulating the letters that were received. I believe the lady that Councillor Kadri mentioned in her letter, she says the OMB file has been closed. I know in the past, I'm looking at Alain here, done a lot of work with correspondence with this person and others, and it tends not always to be factual. So I'm hoping that before anybody gives any weight to this letter, they wait till they see the staff response to these points to see what in fact is a fact and what isn't, okay? But that's one item right off the top of that I can see that's a problem with that letter. So, Madam Chair, I hope we can do that, because these letters get circulated widely, not just to committee members, but to people in the community and media, and sometimes it goes public beyond that with their point. And so I think it's very important that the response from staff that will point out the errors in these letters or missing information also goes out to the public so that they know the real facts of the story. Okay? Can that be done? Somebody can say yes. I see nodding heads, but
Sure.
that doesn't get on the record, so.
Yeah.
We're good?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Gonche is filling in. Ms. Sneddon had to go to another meeting. Don, aren't you supposed to be at that meeting too? Okay. Just, look, I feel like is this the Nana and the mother coming out in me or what? Okay, so Councillor, I think Councillor Nussbaum, you have a question or your comments?
Yeah, just a question on the report. The report mentions that of the 5 conditions which must be met prior to the holding zone being lifted, 3 have been satisfied. And maybe I just didn't read carefully enough, but it wasn't clear to me which 3, if staff can answer them.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Chair, the 3 conditions that have been met are the first one, the first 3. I'll just briefly, the EA for the Carp River and Feed Mill Creek restoration, that EA has been completed. B has been completed, which is the Canada West Landowners Group have commenced phase 1 of the Carp River restoration works. C has been completed. The Mississippi Valley have issued a permit. And what has not been completed are D and E. So D being filling of this subject property, and then an as-built survey being completed to demonstrate that the area is entirely outside of the floodplain, and then the last one being that at all times the flood storage capacity will be maintained. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor, no? Do you want to say anything else, Councillor Kadri, or are we ready to vote on this item?
Madam, just before you get the opportunity to vote, or the committee gets an opportunity to vote on this, my concern still remains, as I mentioned earlier, that I wanted to provide my community an opportunity to make some comments on the zoning change, and seeing that is not possible, or the item wasn't deferred, I'm also happy the fact that this committee had an open discussion on the item going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think that we all understand that this is a very difficult situation for you, because I don't even know whether at this time in that year that you were even thinking about being a councillor for the area. I think that Councillor Stavinga was still the councillor for Stittsville, but it wouldn't even have come before her, because it would have come to Councillor Feltmate, and neither one of those names has been mentioned for, geez, what is it? I don't even know, 11 years around here, right? So, okay. So so on the item at Maple Grove, I'm not going to ask yeas and nays there. Is it carried?
Dissent.
And with 1 dissent. Thanks very much, everybody, for your patience. Thanks, Miguel and Kevin, for coming in. Thank you, Louise and Derek. Okay, so now we are fortunate to have Mr. Gonchi here, because the next and last held item that Councillor Brockington has questions on the Greenbank Road Water Main Class Environmental Assessment Study, and so does Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Nussbaum.
Yeah, mine was, I think, just a simple factual question. In these 2 water main applications which were before us, there was a different percentage of what the city was paying versus what was being paid through the development charges. And I assume that was because there's a calculation done as what percentage of the future users of that water main are new users and therefore subject to the DC charges, and some percentages existing homes. But I didn't want to rely on my intuition there, and just wanted to understand from staff, again, how does that calculation of the ratio of what the city pays for versus what our DC charges, how is that made?
So, Madam Chair, the last DC bylaw update basically identified the share, the city share versus developer share on these projects, and typically it's 90% development charges, 10% benefit to existing, which is a city share. The only reason why you see a difference with the North Island Link report, which is a separate report, is because there is a higher benefit to existing, because it does service part of Manotick. So that's the only reason why we've made a recommendation in that report to change the percentage share between benefit to existing and development charges.
So I know we've already approved that, but if you'd allow me, Chair. So the decision was made to recommend a different ratio, and that was based on an analysis that staff did about that idea of existing users. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brockington.
Great minds think alike. I wasn't going to ask it that way, but that was my exact type of question, was why DCs weren't covering 100% of this and why we were dipping into the reserve fund, but you've answered that, so I have nothing further.
Thank you. So on the item of the Greenbank Road Water Main Class Environmental Assessment Study, and I just, before you say yay or nay, I want to thank Mr. Gonche for the time that he took, because this was going to be before us 2 months ago, and I had problems with it because the Greenbank one, for example, was supposed to be built, which would have ended up being a lesser cost with the development of with the building of the $80 million Greenbank Road realignment under the Jock River and that. Because development doesn't stop, even though I don't have any road capacity to get out of Barrhaven for any of those people, they will have water. That's good news. So I appreciate all the extra work that you did on that. Is it carried? Thank you. And that, I believe, is it. I think we have might have an inquiry. So. On any notices of motion? How about inquiries? Okay, other business? Well, don't forget our next meeting is November the 14th. I don't know how many items are on it, and maybe you'll share that with what you know with me later. But that is day one of the Salvation Army. I've reserved November the 14th, the 15th, so the Wednesday, the Thursday, and the Saturday, and the Friday. We're going to, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, the 14th, the 15th, and the 17th. Yes. So we're going to go from 9:30 to 5:30 with the exception of Thursday, Wednesday. And on, we're not doing on Wednesday, on Thursday, because that is the Ottawa Awards, isn't it? The Order of Ottawa. And CPS. Yeah. So we will, so you can put it in your calendar, but we're not going later than that. I'm not going to make exception. And what I'm thinking about doing is something that's very different, but I think that it will help us because it's at more than one day. At the end of every day, we'll stop about 4:30, 4:45, depending on which day we're going to win. And so the questions that you would have asked of staff before the delegations, you can wrap up with questions of staff at the end of each of the days so that we're fresh to go, and I'm not asking you to keep lists and lists and lists of questions. I don't see that as productive. So we're going to do it a little bit different, but we'll send that all out to everybody. Okay?
Are we going to have non-Salvation Army agenda items on that agenda as well?
Yes.
And we'll get through those first?
Yes.
And then we'll get into it?
Yes. And we're being sensitive to what they are, and you know, obviously I would not want to see something that's going to take 3 hours of delegations, for example. So if we don't have a pressure that is from a legislative perspective with, you know, rules of 90 days, 120 days or whatever, then it will wait till the next one. Yeah, okay? All right, so thanks everybody. So we're adjourned until the 14th, and it'll be in the council chambers.